Welcome to Chapter 1, Episode 4. In the last episode, we learned that the experience of hearing voices varies by culture. The Americans studied tended to hear harsh and threatening voices, while the participants in India and Ghana described their voices as friendly, offering guidance and moral support. Today we're going to look at some research on another population that hears voices, a population that doesn't get a whole lot of respect in the academic literature. I'm talking, of course, about psychics. Albert Powers and Philip Corlett are both professors of psychiatry who study schizophrenia at the Yale School of Medicine. Seeking to better understand the experience of their patients who hear voices, Powers and Corlett began studying psychics, specifically clairaudient psychics, who get their information through an auditory source, as opposed to a clairvoyant who has visions. Powers and Corlett are careful to point out that they neither confirm nor deny the veracity of psychics' beliefs regarding their experiences. This was, of course, necessary to state given the tremendous amount of stigma that exists in academia with regard to psychic phenomena, despite keen interest shown in it by William James, Carl Jung, Pierre Janet, und Wilhelm Wundt. No, but seriously, these guys, these luminaries, in the words of Powers and Corlett, were some of the titans of psychology, and they all felt that there was something to psychic phenomena, despite such phenomena not necessarily lending themselves well to our experimental techniques. But we'll return to this issue of psychic stigma later on in the video. You may be asking yourself, how did Powers and Corlett know that their group of psychics wasn't faking it? Well, they took them at their word, of course. Just kidding. They employed techniques from forensic psychiatry to conclude that the psychics were not malingering. I'll be honest, I had to look up the word malingering, but I bet that you already knew that it meant to feign or exaggerate illness. So were they faking it? Powers and Corlett concluded that they were not, and that the voices heard by their sample of clairaudient psychics were the real deal. And given the fact that as much as 8% of the population reports experiencing auditory hallucinations on a regular basis, 13% hear them at least occasionally, compared to just 1% who are diagnosed with schizophrenia, perhaps it's not so surprising that they were telling the truth. Okay, now on to the study. All participants completed a pen and paper questionnaire followed by semi-structured interviews. There were 4 groups in total, including a control, but only 2 are relevant for our purposes. The patients, designated P plus H plus, meaning that they were positive for a psychotic disorder and positive for voice hearing, and the psychics, designated P minus H plus, meaning they lacked a psychotic disorder but they did hear voices. Here are some of the findings. Patients rated their voices as sometimes producing significant fear or anxiety, whereas all the psychics rated their voice hearing experiences at the lowest distress rating. Not distressing, may be enjoyable. Additionally, the patients described their voices as far more malevolent, and they were much more likely than the psychics to resist the voices that they were hearing. When I read this part about resisting the voices, it reminded me of psychedelics, and how if a trip starts to turn scary, any psychedelic guide will tell you that it's best not to resist it, but rather to surrender to it, as your mindset determines your mental trajectory. This in turn led me to draw a parallel from something in Tanya Lerman's research from the previous episode, which is that the participants in Ghana believe that their voices came from a supernatural realm, and that what is in the mind affects what the supernatural can do. Regardless of your feelings on the supernatural, Powers and Corlett's group of clairaudient psychics seem to have learned these lessons intuitively, as they were more likely to characterize their voices as benevolent, and were more likely to engage with them emotionally and behaviorally. I don't know about you, but it seems to me that the relationship the psychics have with their voices is remarkably similar to that of the participants from India and Ghana from the previous episode. In both instances, the groups furthest away from the Western mental health care system and mainstream Western society in general seem to be doing the best. This echoes research done in the 1980s showing that the course of schizophrenia is far better outside of the West, research which, according to Tanya Lerman, remains robust. Want to know what I found the most interesting from Powers and Corlett's research? Good, because I'm going to tell you. Not only were the psychics less distressed by their voices, but on top of that, they were able to control the onset and offset, which, side note, is exactly what the shamans from episode 2 learned how to do from their elders. This begs the question, how can voice hearing be considered a brain disease if one can learn to turn it on and off at will? Wait, what? Oh, that's not interesting enough for you? Well, how about this? The first time the psychics admitted to voice hearing, the reception by others was much more likely to be positive. Patients, on the other hand, had much more negative voice hearing experiences and were more likely to receive a negative reaction when sharing their voices with others for the first time. Now this, in my opinion, is the most fascinating finding from this research. Remember feedback loops from the last episode? That's exactly what we're seeing here. By the way, a feedback loop is when something happens that amplifies something else or makes that other thing more likely to happen, which then makes the first thing more likely to happen, which then feeds back in to make the next thing more likely, and so on, and kind of creates this self-perpetuating spiral. As it pertains to our subject, let's say that I hear voices and I tell my friend and my friend totally freaks out. This will increase the likelihood that the voices I hear will be harsh and threatening, which will cause my friend to freak out even more, which will make the voices even worse, and so on. That's a feedback loop. As Powers and Corlett's research suggests, a crucial aspect to all of this are those first reactions, those initial imprints. As they set the stage, they lay the foundation for all the experiences to come afterward. If the reaction to one's voice hearing is positive, it's more likely that the voice hearer will have a healthy relationship with their voices. We see this with the shamans from episode 2, with the study participants from India and Ghana in episode 3, and now in episode 4 with our group of clairaudient psychics. Now, of course, a good initial imprint does not rule out the possibility that things will go south. We saw that in episode 2 with the story of Adam, where his initial breakthrough into the psychic realm was a beautiful experience, but subsequent journeys sent him on a downward spiral. And we're gonna see this again in chapter 2. When one is tuned into frequencies beyond normal or default consciousness, as is the case with voice hearing and psychedelics, one is in a very vulnerable state. Imprints made on these higher frequencies are delicate, but if integrated properly, can lead to long-lasting positive change. This is why psychedelics have so much promise when it comes to treating something like PTSD, because they flatten or smooth out the landscape so that new imprints can be made. Think of fresh powder after a night of snowfall, a blank canvas ready to be imprinted with a new pattern. But if that new imprint is a traumatic one, say a doctor's negative reaction to your voice hearing, it'll carve in pathways that reinforce distressing voices, creating a vicious feedback loop. We'll see a powerful example of this in the next episode. Before we finish, I want to address the issue of psychic phenomena in general. I used to think that everyone who believed in such things was hopelessly naive, that all psychics were frauds, that there was always a rational explanation, and that science had disproven the whole lot of it. None of this is true. For starters, science doesn't prove or disprove anything. That's not how it works. Rather, it accepts or rejects ideas based on the evidence. And as for whether there's evidence of psychic phenomena, well, it depends who you ask. We'll get back to this in future episodes, but I'll post a few links in the description for you to check out in the meantime. Until then, I invite you to consider that perhaps what we label supernatural is actually incredibly natural. It's just something we don't understand yet. On that note, I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite quotes from the science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.